welfare. They got into a mess over. But because Blair, this is people, sorry, this is them phoning
I think that's
now.
probably now Tony Blair.
Yeah, you're talking rubbish, Steve. Sorry, I didn't know the phone was on. Let me stop this bloody thing from... Sorry.
No swearing.
No swearing. That couldn't decide what to do about things like the single currency, which is a huge issue in the late 90s. Welfare. They got into a mess over. But because Blair, this is people, sorry, this is them phoning
I think that's
now.
probably now Tony Blair.
Yeah, you're talking rubbish, Steve. Sorry, I didn't know the phone was on. Let me stop this bloody thing from... Sorry.
No swearing.
No swearing. But they had this capacity to communicate.
It's Thursday, it's 12:15, and this is Politics Live.
The relationship between the US and the UK is one of our foremost relationships, and I have confidence in the ambassador in the role that he is doing.
Well, that's what the Prime Minister said yesterday, but now he's sacked that ambassador, Lord Mandelson, over his links to the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. How damaging is this for the government? Charlie Kirk, one of Donald Trump's most prominent allies, has been shot dead in Utah. The president says it's a dark moment for America. And tube strikes continue to grind London to a halt. We'll speak to Eddie Dempsey, the RMT union leader behind the walkout. Joining me, Labour MP Natasha Irons, Conservative MP Neil Shastri-Hurst, author and broadcaster Steve Richards, and former Conservative government advisor Anita Boateng.
Well, Vicki, just before what was an urgent question in the House of Commons, which would have proved very uncomfortable indeed for the government, we got a formal statement from the Foreign Office announcing that Sir Keir Starmer had sacked Lord Mandelson as the British ambassador to the US after just 7 months. This is what it said. It said, in light of the additional information in emails written by Peter Mandelson, the Prime Minister has asked the Foreign Secretary to withdraw him as ambassador, and that's a Foreign Office euphemism for sacked him. The emails show that the depth and extent of Peter Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein is materially different from that known at the time of his appointment. In particular, Peter Mandelson's suggestion that Jeffrey Epstein's first conviction was wrongful and should be challenged is new information. In light of that, and mindful of the victims of Epstein's crimes, he's been withdrawn as ambassador with immediate effect. So, Vicki, I think there's an attempt from the government there to make clear that something changed, not just actually since Lord Mandelson's appointment, but since Prime Minister's questions yesterday, where, with an excruciatingly silent Labour PLP behind him, Sir Keir Starmer offered a full-throated defence of Lord Mandelson. The government is saying what changed were those new emails uncovered by Bloomberg, which showed Lord Mandelson urging Jeffrey Epstein to fight his 2008 conviction.
So do you think for Keir Starmer, who, as you say, was under huge pressure, wasn't he, from the Conservative leader yesterday in the House of Commons, and then there were Labour MPs, a few of them saying that Lord Mandelson should be sacked. Does this deal with the issue now, do you think, or are there still questions for Keir Starmer to answer?
About his personal judgment rather than the political and diplomatic judgment, which the Prime Minister will now have to do without.
Okay, Henry Zeffman, thank you very much for bringing us your analysis of this week's departure from government.
Worst position that you can have at the moment is to have Keir Starmer say in PMQs, yes, I have full confidence in you because you may be gone 2 days later. But the point stands that actually this has been quite a fundamental part of how people and the public regard Keir Starmer. Now, I'm not going to pretend that the public is poring over this specific incident and knows all the ins and outs of the detail. Prosecuted an argument that the public can attach to also be mired in scandal could leave you in a very vulnerable position indeed. So I think this has been a brutal series of weeks for Keir Starmer and really calls to question his judgment. Natasha?
And I think what happens with Keir Starmer, I think he is a person of integrity, actually, and bothered about how that is perceived in the wider world. But you can hear the conversations. People will have said, oh, look, Peter's very charming, he'll get on well with Trump. And, you know, people will have said that to him. So, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. And then he should have said, let's really think this through and scrutinise every possible consequence. And that, I think, is sometimes what is missing in some of the decisions he's made in recent months on appointments and policy direction. will be sleeping for a very long time. The threat is reform. We're out of the European Union. Many of the debates between Blair and Brown were about Europe, but the assumption was we were in. They were debating about whether we should join the euro, rowing about these things. So it was a different land, and people who were part of that landscape can never wholly lose the assumptions they formed then.
And the sadness for me is not just what's happened. And I think the US obviously has a very different history of political assassinations going back to Abraham Lincoln. But it saddens me that the immediate reaction has been, you've got the likes of people like Musk, who again is not in the Republican Party, but nevertheless is a huge and influential figure. I mean, I won't actually repeat what he said, but pointing the finger directly at the left. And I think that this only further inflames discussions in the US. And I remain deeply troubled by what's happening. And I think the important thing here is to remember that although we speak the same language as those in the US, we have a very different culture, and we shouldn't take lessons from them.
Do you think
Blair and Brown in '97 than Keir Starmer was last year? But I've now formed the view that to be a communicator, so behind the scenes there was a lot of chaos in that period. They couldn't decide what to do about things like the single currency, which was a huge issue in the late 90s. Welfare, they got into a mess over. But because Blair, this is them phoning
I think that's
me
probably now Tony Blair.
Yeah, you're talking rubbish, Steve. Sorry, I didn't know the phone was on. Let me stop this bloody thing from. Sorry.
No swearing.
No swearing. But they had this capacity to communicate his welfare. They got into a mess over. But because Blair, this is them phoning
I think that's
me
probably now Tony Blair.
Yeah, you're talking rubbish, Steve. Sorry, I didn't know the phone was on. Let me stop this bloody thing from. Sorry.
No swearing.
No swearing. But they had this capacity to communicate a sense of purpose, the whole component of leadership.
Anita?
Yeah,
what does Keir Starmer need to do now?
I feel like
It's been a pretty disastrous 2 weeks in terms of high-profile departures, hasn't it? Angela Rayner and now Lord Mandelson.
Yeah, I mean, catastrophic. And I think that actually Steve and Natasha are hitting on the same thing. People from New Labour's past, Tim Allen, pictures this very moment, because she would be fantastic.
Steve, can we talk, you touched on it there, about Keir Starmer, the way he's been governing in just over a year, the personnel that he has brought in. You've written a book about Tony Blair, but it is striking how many of the figures from those days that, as you say, we remember, are back in central positions.
Yeah, it's kind of you to mention the book, which is out today. I've got it.
Just so happens.
And I find it fascinating because when I was writing it, it's a short book. There's a series of prime ministers being published, and mine is where I do think there is a crossover, and it's deeply depressing and worrying, is this anti-politics culture. That they're all terrible. And it is appalling to think that for standing for election, you are then have to have protection and security, as if actually taking part in a democratic process is so appalling. You're a potential target in some way or another. And if you step back and think about that, it is so dangerous that that this anti-politics mood in Britain, lots of Europe and the United States leads to that kind of dynamic.
Well, we can debate and we can disagree agreeably here on this programme. That is all for today. Thanks to all my guests. I'll be back on Monday with more Politics Live at 12:15 on BBC Two and iPlayer.